Welcome in. It's so nice that you're here to be with me. I'm Victoria. I'm going to be giving you some book reviews with some content warnings. It's just wonderful to read and to be here. I barely tapped into my summer reading, so I'm going to do my best to mix it up this month and next month so I can complete the goals that I have. Let's start with Moorland Cottage. For the Summer to Passport reading, this one fits home. The Moorland Cottage is a lovely little home. There's a clergyman who has passed away, and his daughter Maggie is the main character of this story. Maggie lives with her mother and her brother Edward. Edward is a pain. Oh boy. So let me tell you about this story a little bit. Next door, we have the Buxtons. They are a bit wealthy, while Maggie's family is struggling. Maggie has to deal with her mother constantly favoring and doing whatever she can for her son. She's just like obsessed with her son, doesn't really care about Maggie. I don't understand it. I struggled to get into this book. I was like, oh, please, I'm so glad this is a short book, but please get more interesting. And once I hit like halfway, we started to learn a lot more about Frank, who is the boy next door basically, but he's a man. And we also learn about Erminia, who is his cousin. She's a pretty good character. She's not like a well-known character throughout this. But Maggie and Frank, they have a really good friendship. And then there is something that happens. And oh, wow. I don't know how to explain this, but the story gets to be really crazy. Edward gets into trouble, her brother, and Maggie does her best. She is such an amazing character. I would not be able to be like Maggie was, but she is so selfless while her brother is so selfish, and her mother too. This really teaches you about the dependency of God, and Maggie learns to have that. She learns to gravitate towards God through everything, and I really love this. And this is something about Elizabeth Gaskell's writing that I have loved. This is, I think, my third book I've read by her. This was like average. It would have been better if I liked the first half, but that second half, I loved the second half. So when that story picks up, the emotions, I like could feel them. The ending was a little bit bittersweet. It was a good ending, but there was something sad that happened. So I was like, I do like how this worked out. This was very interesting. For content, can I say, there is some theft, deceit, there is death, there is tragedy. Also for the Passport to Summer, The Words We Lost. I had been wanting to read this for several months, and this has a book on the cover, and this goes for books in Passport to Summer. And it's about books, but there's a lot more to it, and this was a really, really beautiful story. I have heard such great things about this series in general. Even though I made this one of my books to read for the year, I wanted to read this in spring, so I have delayed this, and I don't know why. It was really good. This was a little bit adventurous and fun. I felt like I was kind of like on a treasure hunt while reading this, because there were things that we were discovering along the way. And it was also sweet and romantic. So what is this about? The main character is Ingrid. She is an editor for Fog Harbor Books. It is a big company. Her best friend was a writer, and her best friend has passed away. Because her best friend had such huge success, she had this series that she had been writing. Everyone wants to know how it ends, and there has to be a manuscript out there. So Ingrid is sent to find out if there is some missing written works that could be published so people can be satisfied. But she does find out that she is in some sort of will for something. Her friend's name was Cecilia or Cece, but they share someone else important. Cece has this cousin, and his name is Joel, and he pretty much lived next door from Cece. And so when they are there, they find out that there is a story that has been written, and it is their story. And they had a past romance, so they have to read this together. So Ingrid is on the hunt for this story that Cece has supposedly written while reading this other story that was left behind. But then her boss wants her to give this story that is not legally allowed to be sent to her. So there's all this drama going on throughout this story. We're able to unfold Ingrid's life and Joel's life and Cece's life and how they all met, what their lives together were like being best friends together, the three of them, and what love stemmed from that. What I didn't like in this book is that I thought this was a Christian book, and yes it is, but it's like barely. Like we don't really get much faith in this. So if you're looking for that, it's sweet and it's in there, it's just not overwhelming. For content, there's talk about alcohol abuse. There's also drug dealing, and there's illnesses, there's death, there's grief, and there's lying. So now I look forward to reading the second book at some point. Hopefully I won't take too long to get to it. Remember the Summer Slasher Readathon that I was doing? I did finish this on the last day of July. So I was able to complete what I wanted to do for this. Home of the Happy, a murder on the Cajun prairie. And it's funny because this sets up for all the prairie reading that I'll be doing and have been doing, but it's a different type of prairie and time period. This is a real true crime story. It was written by the great granddaughter of the person that was murdered. So the man that had been murdered, his name is Aubrey LaHaye, and she grew up in her life knowing about his life because her great grandmother was still alive for a part of her life. Her great grandmother died at 92, so she was able to hear stories from all the different family members, and it is something that intrigued her that she wanted to research and learn more about the case behind her great grandfather's death. So for the Slasher Readathon, it was a story about a killer. Jordan, the writer, she wants to know about what led to this, who was behind this, who was actually thought to be the killer. The one thing that I truly did not like about this is that when it ended, the case had been reopened and they were still trying to learn different things to solve this. So it wasn't actually solved while she finished writing this. So I don't know. I would have to look for updates to see if it was actually truly solved, if the person that had been incarcerated for the murder actually did it or not, because the Innocence Project came around to try to prove that he did not do it. So that's what Jordan does. She really goes through each step, but the way she tells it, she goes back and forth between the past. So this murder happened in January of 1983. So we learn about what happened, where the people around that time were, and the accused and incarcerated was John Brady Balfa. And this whole thing takes place in Louisiana. So she gives a little bit about the history of the French part of her lineage, just to try to make us understand where her great-grandfather came from and where she came from. But there were lots and lots and lots and lots of details. A lot. That sometimes it dragged on. And the amount of language in this was absurd. I wish that it didn't exist. So for content, there are a lot of uses of the F word. There are mentions of assault and rape and murder, details of murder. There were mentions of suicides and other murders and kidnappings and mentions of brothels. So basically she said that there were a string of murders and different responses that happened after this that she doesn't think would have really happened if not for her great-grandfather's death. So she goes into all of that. We are on the Prairie Trail, and the first book that I finished on the day that it started is another Dear America book, Across the Wide and Lonesome Prairie. This is a story about Hattie. My word, if you ever want to know what happened on the trail going to Oregon, this is filled with horrifying things. This is like a horror story. If you want something that is like insane about what people would have witnessed, I can't even imagine the sense of trauma that some of these people would have gone through to see what this fictional person Hattie would have seen. Because throughout this book, there are so many deaths, and there are a lot of little kid deaths too. So the story is that Hattie here, her family wants to go to Oregon, and it starts off with a crazy story that is supposed to be funny, and I'm like, that is not funny at all. Wow, that was really sad. So her father just randomly says, hey, we're going to Oregon. They all go. And throughout this, we see Missouri is where she came from, which was called Missouri throughout this book. And Hattie makes friends along the way, and she sees a lot of crazy things, like I said, before they reach Oregon. So this would be The Diary of a 13-Year-Old. For this one, this was The Loneliness and Isolation for Prairie Trail Readathon, which was an epistolary book. So she writes in a diary. So I did actually think this was a really well-told story. Again, if you want crazy details, this was very intense. I was totally into it the whole time I was reading it. It was good, but it was too much that I feel like I was in pain from, like, as if I experienced some trauma while reading this. It was intense. So teens get married in this, and there's even this one person that she talks about that gets married to someone twice her age that has children. And I was like, wow. There are things that allude to people being intimate without saying anything. But, you know, Hattie's like, oh, I don't understand. But they're talking about the possibility of how to make babies or whatever with people that are getting married. There are deaths of babies and people and children. The Native Americans are called derogatory names in this for what would have been said back then. There are definite injuries and sicknesses and illnesses throughout this. There are kids that go missing. There is theft. There's deceit. There are accidental deaths. There are just like intense things that I was like, why did they have to write about that? This is aimed for kids, definitely older kids, teens. Yeah. Whew. I'm glad I got this one done first, because this one, And then for the second book that I read for the Prairie Readathon is Across the Crying Sands. So this was supposed to be for a book that triggers me, and it did. And I'm going to just say briefly why this book would trigger me. I grew up not knowing who my grandfather was at all, not a name, not a hint of a thing. My grandmother kept it to her grave. She didn't want my dad to know who his father was at all. And there is a case throughout this book where people are keeping the identity of parentage away from the main character. And that bothers me, who has fought and fought to find out my lineage and found my lineage thanks to a lot of research since I was a teenager. That is why it triggered me, because I am one of those people like, they should know. You should tell them, please. They don't want to live their lives. My dad was 73 when he finally found out who his actual father was. That's why it's a trigger. And if you want an update on that, it's been 6 years, and yes, we still are in contact with family members. This is about Mary. Mary is 17 years old. She's about to get married. She really loves John. He is from the Netherlands. They have a very interesting relationship. I don't like the relationship at all, actually, but this is supposed to be based off of a woman that existed in Oregon. We learn that her family came over through the Oregon Trail. They give you little hints and details about what that was like for them, very much when she was like a little girl. And so now they've been in Oregon, and her husband-to-be is going to get a homestead built, and she's all excited about it, but he's got nothing built yet. And she's like, well, I could help you build. And that's like her attitude throughout. Oh, I could do it. My dad taught me how to do this. Let's go build it together. And he's like, no, it is my duty as your husband to provide that for you. But he takes his time, okay? They're constantly butting heads throughout this. They don't really get along. We have two other stories that are brought up, at least different perspectives. She has a Native American friend that she has known since she has been there. They are very close. So I'm guessing that one of the future stories is more about her life. And the main concept of this is that this talks about mail carriers, as in like the first people that ever transported mail from place to place in the West in Oregon, and specifically about the first woman mail carrier. So Mary, she wants to do this, and it doesn't come up for quite a while, but she wants to contribute. The only problem is that I really have a hard time with Mary, and I can't say exactly why I have a hard time with her, but as I was reading this, I felt like she was a teen, okay? And then a young girl in her 20s that I feel didn't understand her responsibilities and what she could contribute and how she could help with her family. Instead, she wanted to be kind of like the one that provided for the family in a time period where it was well known that a woman was to stay at home and care for her children. And I just really struggled to like her attitude throughout this. The other story is her mother's perspective. Her mother is hiding something from her, and it has to do with the parentage, as I stated. It is brought up really early on that Mary thinks these are her real parents, but they have this secret knowing that they are not her real parents, but they are her real parents because they raised her. So we have to learn what happened. Why is she so afraid to tell her daughter, I'm not your birth mother? And then there's this other story of this friend that they have. He has like this obsession with this woman that he had been in love with at some point. It's just weird because he doesn't see her ever. He doesn't talk to her. He just wonders like what she's up to, and he hears things about her, but he doesn't interact, and it's just kind of creepy. So anyway, I struggled to like this one. I didn't really enjoy it, but I thought the writing was well done. I didn't like the characters, and I really wanted to. I liked the Native American character, and I can't remember her name right now, and I feel horrible about that. So for content, there are abandonment issues that are brought up. There are some spiritual things with Native Americans sometimes brought up in here. There's child loss. There's destruction of a home. You know, there's lies and deceit, obviously. I hope the second book is better. That's all I can say. And I do want to know what happens. Okay, The Blossoming Summer. This is going to take over another book that was on my summer TBR list that I had given you. And that was on my to read list for several years. And I decided I don't really want to read it after all, and to replace it with this one. And I know that's really weird that I made the list. I worked on the list for a while, and then suddenly I was like, I read a lot of reviews, and it just didn't seem like something I wanted to read right now. Maybe in the future. But The Blossoming Summer, I almost put this on the list, and I had wished I put it on the list. So now it's on the list and it's done. I saw this being advertised actually a few places, and I was like, like, ooh, that looks so pretty. I'm sorry for the glare. It's a library book. Look at this beautiful cover, guys. So what is this about? This is Rosemary. She is 13 years old. She lives in England. The Second World War is starting to happen, and there are rumors of London possibly getting destroyed. She's been living with her aunt and uncle. She really likes it there, but there's a problem. She hasn't seen her parents in several years, or her brothers. They're all split up. They're trying to find work. They're trying to provide for them. So they're all living with different people, and she misses them, and she just wants them together. So suddenly her father says, hey, we're gonna move to America. Now, her mother is English from England, but her father's from America. And she's never been to America. And she's a little nervous because they have to cross the sea during the war. And they don't dwell on the actual journey, just slightly. But this is about her trying to connect with her family, trying to rebuild, being the positive person that brings them all together. She really, really wants that family unit. It's important to her. And so when they get to the US, they end up going to Wisconsin, where her grandmother lives. Her grandmother's really into her garden, and she loves plants. She even brought a plant from England herself. She is trying to connect now to her grandmother, but her father doesn't really get along with her grandmother, and she wants peace really badly. And so she's finding ways to do that, but she also wants to learn, and she starts to learn more about her family and her lineage, and it's really important to her, but not so much to her father. So she's like worried about how that can work, and she wants to be a good big sister. It is really lovely to see how she tries so hard to connect with her family. I loved this. It was such a good book. What surprised me is that little by little while reading this, there was some bits of faith in here, like how God would care for her little violet plant. I just thought it was so sweet. Not throughout it so much, but you could see it. They talk about going to church together and what that feels like for her and how she is feeling closer to God. It is really sweet. The person that wrote this has like the same sort of roots that this girl has. And she had found out about someone from that wartime that had similar roots too. So she wanted to write a story that she could relate to. And I just thought that was really cool. So I highly recommend this book. It was amazing. It's a middle grade book, but it was just so beautiful. A great story. And I have seen a couple other booktubers now talk about it just this month, and I was like, yes, I had been wanting to read it for content. There are some talks about mistreatment of people because of where they come from. There's war talk, there's family separation and grief, and there is some deceit. But ultimately, I loved it. Okay, so for the summer bingo that Paris has going on, there was one that said to reread a book, and I was like, thankfully, I am already rereading a book that I just started in July. You know how I always say how there are only 4 books that I own, and I added at the beginning of this year a 5th book? Well, it's going back down to 4 because I reread a book that I had planned to eventually give away afterwards because I wanted to read it to my older sons. And that is the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. I read this book several years ago. I absolutely loved it. I think everyone should read it. It is really, really heavy though. One of the few books that I have now reread. It is short. There's an intro and there is an appendix. When I first read this, I read the prologue and the appendix, and I really, really loved it. I did not do that when I read it to my family. I just read what he wrote to everyone. So there is something that I've always heard my whole life, even though I grew up in New Jersey, like there were some really good owners of slaves that treated their slaves well. And I always have said to them, anyone that owns another person is doing wrong, that no person should be owned. That is always my response. And this, he reiterates that. And one thing that you will learn is that for him, the most religious people were the hardest on him and the other slaves. That might be really hard for people to read and to accept, but this was his experience, what he had to deal with. This brought on some deep discussions with some of my kids, especially my oldest kid. He was really struggling with some of this because it's like he wants to be so happy all the time. So when he found out something so horrible, it really brought him down. But we had really good discussions, and he is 19 years old. He got emotional over this. There are some things about Frederick Douglass's life that I would have liked to know. There is like a brief mention about him having a wife, and it comes out near the end, and you're like, when did he have a wife? Like, who is this woman? And he says how she had already been free. So I was like, well, I want to know about her. So I would have to research that. He didn't talk much about her, probably to protect her, but he also tries to talk about what his life was like starting in a family that had been in slavery. He was born into slavery in Maryland. And he talks about the different owners that he had, and they were all pretty much related, or he was even rented out to some slave owners for like a year, how they treated him and how they treated others. Lots of murder. He saw a lot of brutal things. He was brutally treated as well. So this is very heavy, a lot of torture, a lot of mind games, a lot of horrible things that he endured. He is an amazing writer. Now, throughout this, for content, there are usages of derogatory terms. I did not read them. When I came across those words, I would say derogatory term. That's how I actually read these. And there were a couple D words in here, and I think a BA word. So when I got to those words, and it was him quoting usually what his masters would say, like I wouldn't actually say them because I don't swear. So that is something to keep in mind, but I do think this is a very important story to learn for history. My 17-year-old said, you know, I've always heard about him, but I didn't know much about him. So thank you for reading it to me. So the amount of derogatory terms in this were probably about 10 to 15, by the way. It's a lot for a little book. And so much physical abuse. You could tell that there were sexual abuse, but he was so kind in not actually stating about what went on to some of these women. But yes, this was excellent. Oh, thank you so much. I hope that next time we'll have a lot more Prairie books read and a lot more summer reading books read. And by the time this video comes out, it'll probably be the 3rd week of August. But when I'm recording this, it is only the 4th of August. That's how delayed you are in receiving my reviews. All right, guys, have a great day, have a great week, and goodbye.